The Desert Rose Motel stood like a forgotten relic on the edge of Route 66, its neon sign buzzing erratically, casting pink and blue flickers across the cracked asphalt of the parking lot. The air was heavy with the scent of dry sagebrush and diesel, the kind of smell that clings to your clothes and your memories. I leaned against the doorframe of room 17, my cigarette glowing faintly, its ember a tiny rebellion against the vast, star-strewn dark. The desert stretched out beyond the motel, endless and silent, broken only by the low rumble of a truck tearing down the highway, its headlights slicing through the night before vanishing into the horizon. I exhaled, watching the smoke curl upward, blending with the constellations I'd never bothered to name. My name's Lila. I don't know why I'm telling you this, spilling my soul like whiskey from a cracked glass, but some nights carve themselves into you so deep you can't help but bleed them out. That night, God, that night, was one of those. It was late summer, the kind of heat that wraps around you like a lover you don't want, making your skin sticky and your thoughts slow. I'd been working this stretch of road for years, from Tulsa to Albuquerque, motels like the Desert Rose my temporary stage, each room a backdrop for someone else's fleeting desires. I was good at it, good at reading men, good at giving them what they wanted without giving too much of myself. But that night wasn't about what I was good at. It was about him. I flicked my cigarette to the ground, grinding it under the heel of my worn black boots. The motel's office light glowed faintly across the lot, where Marla, the night clerk, was probably slumped over her dog-eared romance novel, dreaming of heroes who didn't exist. I adjusted my dress, black, simple, cut to cling just enough to keep their eyes where I wanted them, and checked my phone. 10:03 p.m. He was late. They usually were. Men who booked through cryptic texts and burner numbers always kept you waiting, like the delay was part of their power play. But his message had been different. Short, polite, almost formal, room 17, 10 p.m. Please be discreet. No name, no details, just a time and a place. I'd been doing this long enough to know that meant something, trouble, money, or maybe something worse. I stepped back inside, the door creaking shut behind me, sealing me in with the stale air and the ghosts of 100 other nights. Room 17 was like every other motel room on this road, faded floral wallpaper peeling at the corners, a bed with springs that groaned like they were confessing sins, and a single lamp on the nightstand casting a warm, amber glow that softened the edges of reality. The curtains were thin, mustard yellow, swaying slightly as the desert wind slipped through a crack in the window. A faint smell of cigarette smoke lingered, embedded in the carpet, the walls, my life. I sat on the edge of the bed, my reflection staring back from the cracked mirror above the dresser. My dark hair fell in loose waves around my shoulders, and my eyes, green, tired, too old for my 28 years, held stories I'd never tell. Not even to you. I lit another cigarette, the match flaring briefly before settling into a steady flame. The clock on the nightstand ticked to 10:07. I hated waiting. It gave me too much time to think, to let the past creep in like dust through the cracks. Memories are dangerous out here, on this endless ribbon of asphalt where every mile marker feels like a gravestone for something you've lost. I thought about Mama, her hands rough from years of scrubbing floors in Tulsa, her voice sharp as she told me to get out before the city chewed me up. I thought about the first night I worked this job, 19 and desperate, crying in a motel bathroom with a flickering fluorescent light, promising myself it was just for 1 month, 1 year, just until I could stand on my own. That was 9 years ago. Funny how temporary can stretch into forever when you're not looking. I thought about the men I'd met since then, their faces blurring into one another, truckers with calloused hands, businessmen with wedding rings they slipped into their pockets, drifters with eyes as empty as the road. They all wanted something, even if they didn't know what. And I gave it to them, or at least the version they paid for. But I kept my heart locked away, buried deep where even I couldn't find it. Until tonight, maybe. Until him. A soft knock at the door snapped me out of my reverie, my heart kicking up a notch, not from fear, but from something else, something I couldn't name. Anticipation, maybe, or the weight of the unknown. I stood, smoothing my dress, and crossed the room, my boots clicking softly on the linoleum. I opened the door, and there he was. He stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the neon glow, his face half hidden in shadow. Tall, lean, with a worn leather jacket that smelled faintly of motor oil and time. His hair was dark, tousled, like he'd been driving with the windows down for hours, the desert wind tangling it into knots. But it was his eyes that stopped me, gray, like storm clouds rolling over the plains, heavy with a sorrow I couldn't place. He didn't smile, didn't speak, just looked at me like he was seeing through the makeup, the dress, the walls I'd built to survive. Straight to the parts of me I'd forgotten how to reach. "You're Lila?" His voice was low, rough, like gravel under tires, but there was a softness to it, a hesitance that didn't match the hard lines of his face. I nodded, stepping aside to let him in. "You're late." He glanced at the clock as he passed, his boots leaving faint dust marks on the carpet. "Got held up." "Sorry." I closed the door, the latch clicking softly, and the room felt smaller, the air thicker, like the space itself was holding its breath. He didn't sit, didn't take off his jacket, just stood by the window, looking out at the neon sign as it flickered, its buzz a steady heartbeat in the quiet. I watched him, noting the way his shoulders tensed, the way his fingers twitched slightly, like he was fighting the urge to reach for something, a cigarette, a gun, a memory. He wasn't like the others. No bravado, no sleazy grin, no rush to get to the point. He was still. Too still. Like a man carrying a weight he couldn't put down. "You want a drink?" I asked, gesturing to the cheap bottle of whiskey on the dresser. It was mostly for show, most guys didn't say no, and it helped loosen them up, made the night pass faster. He shook his head, still staring out the window. "Not tonight." I sat back on the bed, crossing my legs, trying to read him. He was different, and that made me nervous. I was used to predictable men who wanted what they wanted and left when they got it. But this guy? He was a puzzle, and I wasn't sure I wanted to solve it. I lit another cigarette, the smoke curling around me like a shield. "What's your name?" I asked, though I knew he wouldn't tell me. They never did. He turned then, his eyes meeting mine, and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. "Does it matter?" he said, not unkindly, but with a finality that told me not to push. I shrugged, playing it cool, though my heart was racing. "Just making conversation." He nodded, almost to himself, and finally sat in the chair by the window, his long legs stretched out in front of him. The lamp's light caught the stubble on his jaw, the faint scar above his eyebrow, a thin white line that told a story I'd never hear. He wasn't handsome, not in the polished way of city guys with their tailored suits and fake smiles. He was raw, unguarded, like he'd been carved from the desert itself, rough edges, weathered, but beautiful in a way that hurt to look at. We sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the hum of the neon sign and the occasional rumble of a truck on the highway. I was used to silence, but this one was different. It wasn't empty. It was heavy, filled with things unsaid, questions unasked. I found myself watching his hands, the way they rested on his knees, strong but gentle, like they'd held something fragile once and never forgotten how. I wondered what those hands had touched, what they'd lost. I wondered why I cared. "You don't belong here," he said suddenly, his voice cutting through the quiet like a knife. I laughed, sharp and bitter, the sound echoing in the small room. You don't know me. I know enough. His eyes were on me now. Steady, unyielding, like he could see the cracks in my armor. This place, it's not you. I wanted to snap back, to tell him he had no right to say that, but something in his voice stopped me. It wasn't judgment. It was recognition. Like he saw the parts of me I tried to hide, the girl who used to dream of painting, who used to lie in the grass behind her childhood home and imagine a life bigger than Tulsa. The girl who still lived somewhere inside me, buried under years of motels and mistakes. I looked away, my throat tight, the cigarette burning down to my fingers. You don't know what I am. He didn't answer, just watched me, and in that moment, I felt exposed, like he'd peeled back every layer I'd built to survive this life. I stood, needing to move, needing to break the spell. I walked to the window, pulling the curtain aside to stare at the highway. The neon sign buzzed louder now, its light painting my skin in shades of pink and blue, like a bruise that didn't hurt. The desert stretched out beyond, vast and unforgiving, and I wondered if it would swallow me whole one day, like it had so many others. Why are you here? I asked, my voice softer than I meant it to be, barely audible over the hum of the sign. He didn't answer right away. When he did, his words were careful, measured, like he was weighing each one. I'm passing through. Needed a place to stop. I turned, leaning against the windowsill, studying him. That's not an answer. He smiled then, just a flicker, but it was enough to make my chest ache, like a memory I didn't know I had. It's all I've got. The night stretched on, and we talked, not about anything real, not about the things that mattered, but about the small stuff that fills the spaces between. He told me about a diner in Arizona with the best cherry pie he'd ever tasted, about a jukebox in Texas that only played Hank Williams. I told him about the time I found a stray dog outside a motel in New Mexico, how I fed it scraps from my diner takeout and cried when it ran off into the night. We laughed, and it felt foreign, like a language I'd forgotten how to speak. His voice was like a lullaby, soothing in a way I hadn't expected, and his eyes softened when he looked at me, like he was seeing something he hadn't expected either. I don't know how long we talked, hours, maybe, though it felt like minutes. The whiskey bottle stayed unopened, the bed untouched. He didn't make a move, didn't cross that line, but every glance, every pause, felt more intimate than anything I'd known in this room. I caught myself wondering what it would be like to touch his hand, to feel the warmth of his skin, to know his story. But I didn't ask. I couldn't. That wasn't how this worked. Then, as the first hint of dawn crept through the curtains, painting the room in shades of gray, he stood, pulling something from his jacket pocket. A small, folded piece of paper, its edges worn like it had been carried for too long. He held it out to me, his fingers brushing mine for just a second, sending a jolt through me I couldn't explain. His touch was warm, steady, and I wanted to hold on to it longer than I should have. Keep this, he said, his voice low, urgent, like he was entrusting me with something precious. Don't open it. Not yet. I took it, my heart pounding so hard I thought he could hear it. What is it? He didn't answer, just looked at me one last time, his eyes tracing my face like he was memorizing every detail. Then he turned and walked out, the door clicking shut behind him, leaving me alone with the hum of the neon sign and 1,000 questions I'd never get to ask. I stood there, clutching the paper, my mind racing. Who was he? Why had he come? And what was in that note, burning a hole in my hand? I sank onto the bed, the springs creaking under me, and stared at the paper, its weight heavier than it should have been. I wanted to open it, to tear it apart and know, but something stopped me. Fear, maybe, or hope, both felt dangerous in their own way. I slipped the note into the pocket of my denim jacket, where it sat like a secret I wasn't sure I could carry. The Desert Rose Motel faded into the haze of my memory. But that night clung to me like the scent of sagebrush after a storm. I carried the note with me, tucked in my jacket pocket, its edges softening with every day I didn't open it. I told myself I'd forget him, that he was just another shadow passing through my life, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw his, gray, stormy, haunted. I saw the scar above his brow, the way his fingers twitched like they were reaching for something lost. I saw the way he looked at me, like I was more than the sum of my choices, more than the girl in room 17. Weeks passed, and I kept moving, motel to motel, town to town, the endless ribbon of Route 66 stretching out before me like a promise I didn't believe in anymore. I worked, I smiled, I played the part, but it felt hollower than before. The men I met blurred together, their voices a dull hum against the memory of his. I started to wonder if I'd imagined him, if he was just a fevered dream born from too many nights alone. But the note in my pocket was real, its weight a constant reminder that he'd been there, that he'd seen me. It was late fall when I saw him again, at a motel called the Starlight Inn, a crumbling oasis just past the Arizona border. The air was cooler now, sharp with the promise of winter, and the neon sign above the motel flickered in a rhythm that matched the ache in my chest. I was in the parking lot, leaning against my beat-up Chevy, the metal cold against my back. I was smoking, watching the stars, trying to ignore the way the night felt too big, too empty. The gravel crunched under my boots as I shifted, the cigarette's ember glowing faintly, a tiny light in the dark. I heard him before I saw him, footsteps, slow and deliberate, like he didn't want to startle me. My heart stopped, then started again, faster, as he stepped into the light of the neon sign. Same leather jacket, same tousled hair, same storm gray eyes. He didn't seem surprised to see me, like he'd known I'd be here, like the road had led him back to me. "Lila," he said, my name soft on his lips, like it was something sacred. I straightened, tossing my cigarette to the ground, grinding it out with my heel. "You again." He smiled, that flicker I remembered, and it hit me like a punch, stealing my breath. "You sound disappointed." "I'm not." I wasn't. But I was confused, angry, curious, all at once, a storm of emotions I didn't know how to name. "What are you doing here?" He didn't answer right away, just walked closer, stopping a few feet away. The neon light painted his face in shades of red and gold, and I noticed new lines around his eyes, like the road had aged him in ways time couldn't. "I needed to see you," he said finally, his voice low, almost lost in the hum of the night. I laughed, but it came out wrong, shaky, like I was trying to convince myself I didn't care. "You don't even know me." "I know enough." He stepped closer, and I could smell the road on him, dust, gasoline, and something sharper, like regret. "I know you're still carrying that note." My hand went to my pocket instinctively, feeling the paper's edges through the denim. I hadn't opened it, hadn't even looked at it, but I carried it everywhere, like a talisman, like a piece of him. "Why does it matter?" I asked, my voice sharper than I meant, betraying the fear underneath. "Because it's important." His eyes held mine, and I felt that same pull, that same sense of being seen, like he could peel back the layers of my life and find the girl I'd buried long ago. "Because you're important." I wanted to laugh again, to brush it off, to tell him he was crazy, but the words stuck in my throat. Nobody had ever said that to me, not like that, not with that kind of quiet certainty that made my chest ache. I turned away, staring at the highway, the passing lights of a truck blurring into streaks of white and red. "You don't get to say that," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the wind. "You don't get to show up and make me feel like this." Like what? His voice was closer now, and I realized he'd moved, standing just behind me. Not touching, but close enough that I could feel the warmth of him, the space between us alive with a current I couldn't ignore. Like I'm more than this. I gestured at the motel, the road, the life I'd been living for too long. Like I could be someone else. You can. His hand brushed my arm, just for a second, and it was like a spark in the dark, lighting up every nerve in my body. You already are. I turned to face him, and for a moment, we just stood there, the world falling away. The neon sign buzzed, the wind whispered through the sagebrush, and his eyes held mine, steady and sure, like he was anchoring me to something real. I wanted to ask him everything, his name, his story, why he kept finding me, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I asked, why me? He didn't answer, just reached into his jacket and pulled out another piece of paper, this one smaller, worn, like it had been carried for years. He pressed it into my hand, his fingers lingering against mine, warm and steady, and I felt that jolt again, that spark that made me want to hold on forever. Read this one first, he said. Then decide if you want to open the other. I looked down at the paper, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break. What's in it? Me, he said simply, his voice soft but heavy, like it carried the weight of a lifetime. And then he was gone, disappearing into the shadows of the parking lot, leaving me with two secrets now, burning in my hands. I stood there for a long time, the papers heavy in my pockets, my mind a storm of questions. I didn't go back to my room right away. Instead, I sat on the hood of my Chevy, the metal cold against my thighs, and lit another cigarette. The stars were brighter here, sharper, like they were watching me, waiting to see what I'd do. I thought about the life I'd built, the motels and the men, the nights that blended into one another like a song stuck on repeat. I thought about Mama, how she'd warned me about men like him, men who made you feel things you couldn't afford to feel. But he wasn't like them. He was something else, something I didn't have a name for. I pulled the second paper from my pocket, turning it over in my hands. It was old, creased, the edges soft from being handled too many times. I didn't open it, not yet. I was afraid, not of him, but of what he represented. A door, maybe, to a life I'd stopped believing in. I slipped it back into my pocket, next to the first note, and drove back to my room, the highway stretching out like a question I wasn't ready to answer. The next few weeks were a blur of motels and faces, but he was always there, in the back of my mind, his voice echoing in the quiet moments. I started noticing things I hadn't before, the way the desert smelled after rain, like petrichor and possibility, the way the neon signs flickered like they were trying to tell me something. I started dreaming again, not the nightmares of my childhood, but dreams of open roads and gray eyes, of a life where I wasn't defined by the rooms I left behind. One night, in a motel called the Blue Cactus, I finally opened the second note. I was alone, the room dark except for the lamp's amber glow, the curtains swaying as the wind whispered outside. My hand shook as I unfolded the paper, the ink faded but legible, written in a neat, slanted script. Lila. If you're reading this, it means I found you again. My name is Eli. I've been running for a long time, from a life I can't go back to, from mistakes I can't undo. I saw you that night in room 17, and something in me stopped running. You were like a light in the dark, a reminder of everything I'd forgotten how to feel. I don't expect you to save me. I just needed you to know that you already have. If you open the other note, you'll know the rest. But be careful. It's not just my story, it's yours now, too. Eli. I read it again, then again, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break. Eli. His name was Eli. And he'd seen me, really seen me, in a way no one else ever had. I set the letter down, my fingers trembling, and reached for the first note, the one from that night in room 17. It felt heavier now, like it carried the weight of both our lives. I unfolded it slowly, my breath catching. Inside was a single sentence, written in the same careful script. "Come find me, Lila. I'll be waiting at the end of the road." Below it was an address, somewhere in California, a town called Haven's End, a name that sounded like a promise and a warning all at once. I stared at it, my mind spinning. He was asking me to leave, to chase him, to step into a life I didn't know. I thought about the road, the endless stretch of Route 66, the motels and the neon signs, the life I'd built to keep myself safe. And I thought about him, Eli, his eyes, his voice, the way he'd made me feel like I was more than this. The blue cactus motel faded into the night as I sat on the bed, the 2 notes on the nightstand, glowing faintly in the lamp's light. The room smelled of dust and time, the curtains swaying as the desert wind slipped through the window, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and freedom. I lit a cigarette, the match flaring briefly, and watched the smoke curl toward the ceiling, my mind a tangle of fear and longing. I'd read his words, Eli's words, over and over, until they were burned into me, as permanent as the scars I carried from this life. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who painted wildflowers in her sketchbook, who believed in love and second chances. She was still there, somewhere, buried under years of motels and men, under the weight of choices I couldn't take back. Eli had seen her, somehow, in the flicker of neon light, in the quiet spaces between our words. And now he was asking me to find her again, to find him, to find something bigger than the life I'd settled for. I stood, walking to the window, the curtains brushing my arm like a lover's touch. The desert was quiet now, the stars bright above the highway, like they were guiding me somewhere I didn't know how to go. I could stay, keep living this life, keep surviving. It was safe, in its own way, predictable, familiar, a cage I'd built myself. Or I could go, take the risk, follow the road to Haven's End, to Eli, to whatever waited at the end of that note. I didn't know what I'd find, didn't know if he'd be there, or if this was just another dream I'd lose to the dust. I packed my bag that night, the letters tucked safely in my jacket, next to the pack of cigarettes and the lighter I'd had since Tulsa. The Chevy's engine roared to life, a low, steady growl that felt like courage. I pulled onto Route 66, the neon lights of the blue cactus fading in my rearview mirror, the road stretching out before me like an open question. The desert air rushed through the open window, cool against my skin, and for the first time in years, I felt something shift inside me. Not hope, not exactly, but something close, a spark, a possibility, a chance to be more than the girl in room 17. The drive to Haven's End took 3 days, 3 days of diners and gas stations, of songs on the radio that felt like they were written for me. I thought about Eli every mile, his face sharper in my mind than it had any right to be. I thought about the life I was leaving behind, the motels and the men, the nights that had worn me down to someone I barely recognized. I thought about Mama, how she'd told me to keep going, to find something worth fighting for. Maybe this was it. Maybe he was. Haven's End was a small town, tucked against the Pacific, where the road ended and the ocean began. The address led me to a diner, a weathered building with a sign that read Sally's Place in faded red letters. I parked the Chevy, my heart pounding, and stepped inside, the bell above the door chiming softly. The place was quiet, just a few locals at the counter, the smell of coffee and fried eggs heavy in the air. I scanned the room, looking for him, but he wasn't there. I sat in a booth by the window, the vinyl seat creaking under me, and ordered a coffee I didn't drink. The waitress, an older woman with kind eyes, smiled at me like she knew something I didn't. I pulled the notes from my pocket, laying them on the table, their words a map to this moment. I waited, watching the door, watching the road, watching the waves crash against the shore outside. Hours passed, and he didn't come. I don't know when I realized he wasn't coming, that he'd never been coming. Maybe he was running again, from whatever he'd been running from that first night. Maybe he was a ghost, a dream, a story I'd told myself to keep going. But as the sun set over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I felt something settle inside me. Not peace, not exactly, but something close. I'd come here, to the end of the road, because of him. But I'd stay for me. I left the diner that night, the note still in my pocket, and walked to the edge of the water. The waves were loud, relentless, washing away the dust of the road. I pulled out the first note, the one that had brought me here, and read it one last time. Come find me, Lila. I'll be waiting at the end of the road. I folded it carefully and let it go, watching it drift out to sea, carried away by the tide. I don't know if I'll ever see Eli again. I don't know if he was real, or if he was just a mirror, showing me the parts of myself I'd forgotten. But I'm here, at the end of Route 66, and for the first time in years, I feel like I'm starting over. The road brought me to him, and he brought me to myself. And maybe that's enough.